Good afternoon, all. Paul from CamelbackTrading.org coming to you this Friday afternoon, June 13th. We're looking at window traders market profile of the SNNQ. So we will go over all the charts, see where we stand after this week. Tough day, tough week. This market's been very tough lately. First, let's go over what the market did and didn't do. And then I'll get into some other things. Righty gaps lower for the second day in a row. Okay? They're also holding their 3-day island top up here because they never filled yesterday's. So they have two gaps back to back. They're down on the daily. However, today they just go out with the day's high and low. We had a very small price probe to the bottom for all three of us, which I wouldn't use. So the gaps are your main focus in righty. NQ, again, goes out with just the day's high and low. ES, the day's high and low. We gapped lower, took the gaps back. We went trend up. We took those back. ES tried to get into the upper distribution from yesterday. Absolutely rejected. No overnights again. Way above last year, the last 2 years' averages in ES for not getting them. This is the 7th time already this year we haven't gotten an overnight. It was 9 times all of 2024. We're not even halfway through the year. And in 2023, only 5 times. Now, NQ, 10 times this year, we haven't gotten one yet. Now, I don't have the stats for NQ for the previous 2 years. Now, again, that's a function of how big our overnights have been. No doubt about it. We've had some huge overnights this year. I said this morning about the market with the knee-jerk reaction, about the market not caring about it. And I still believe that firmly. And it proved it early on as we opened and just came, we attempted to go down in B and C, totally failed, filled the gaps, and tried to get into yesterday's ranges. Now, the inside day down finally paid, but it really didn't pay till J period when you think about it, okay? Because we drove up, right? We opened below the inside day. The gap and go once again failed. And then you pushed up. So you really didn't get anything out of that inside day down until J period when we went and took out both sides of the IBs when we went down in the afternoon. So I'm not going to go over my trades except to say, well, 2 things. I started the day off poorly, but I battled my ass back. Still lost money on the day. My first trade, so I'm going to tell you the 2 that I lost on, and then I'm just going to go out there and say I battled on both sides of the market to cut it down. So I took a short against, now we're also down on the daily for all 3 of these. I was going to give ES some leeway after B and C period, but after coming down and making new lows in K and M, the daily's down, and you'll see that on the chart. So ES, right, I said the 6 low was their balance low, okay? And once we got below it, the daily was down. So we gapped below it. So when we rallied to it in A period, I took a short. I'm like, let's see what happens now. We're going right where the market came out of balance. Well, it ripped right through it, and I lost 40 points. That wasn't that big a deal. Maybe not the greatest trade. The one that killed me was in C period, but I would take this trade again, okay? Now, ES filled their gap in A, but NQ did not. And then B went down. I missed that staple play to get A's low, okay? So we had the gap still. We were 1 time framing down, indices. So and they were pretty active. So when I took a short right before the turnover, a 5 lot, and then I added 5 when it pushed up. Well, you saw what happened in C period. I ended up losing 280 points on that. So I was down about 320 points at that point in C period in my personal account. I wasn't happy, but another thing that and I think every trade in my room will attest to this, I just kept calm, cool, and went about the day after that. Right? There's no yelling and screaming. Sure, I'm churning inside. I'm not happy. Nobody wants to lose money, but there's no yelling, no screaming, no blaming anything. Right? It was my decision. I would do that trade again with all the MGI. Now, look, I know I said earlier in the video and to my room that the longer time frame is still in control, and it is the monthly and weekly. It is. However, that didn't mean holding the gap. I mean, we came pretty close to filling the gap in NQ&A, and then she totally rolled again. So the odds, I wasn't looking for the overnight low. I was just looking for the IB low. So the odds of getting that after failing to fill the gap and one time framing down and having gap, value, indices, 5 powerful things in their favor, it shouldn't have been that hard to get it, regardless of the longer time frame being controlled by the bulls. Hope that makes sense. Right? It's not about my trading. It's about explaining why I'm doing something with and what I think the market's doing. So I would take that trade again. I'm not happy I lost all that money, but I would take it. But I did battle tremendously, and I ended up losing only 118 points on the day. So from a $6,500 loss, I lost like, $2,200, $2,400. I can live with that. Still made money on the week in my personal account, and I can live with that. So what's happening with the market right now? Well, it's still reacting. The reason it pulled down again in J was, Iran is lobbing missiles at Israel. No kidding, they're going to do that. You don't think they're going to retaliate? They said this was going to go on for days. It's like a baseball game. It's like they announce it. Hey, by the way, in the top of the 5th, we're going to bomb Israel. And in the bottom of the 6th, we're going to go right back at Iran. It's a play-by-play war. It's a farce. And in 2-3 days, it'll be over and you go on to the next thing. So here's what I don't understand. If the reason the market went down in the overnight was because of what happened, well, why the hell did we rally and take back the gap? It's all a joke. It's all garbage. Okay? Now, here's what's very important going into Monday before we get to the charts. Our hump levels will be today's high and today's low. Now, that sounds simple, but they're important. There's nothing inside of today. So if you open up inside of today's ranges, you're going to have massive chop on Monday. However, if you take out today's low, not only is the daily down, but now the weekly is back in balance. So that would be a big change. However, if you take out today's high on Monday, well, the monthly and weekly is still healthy and the weekly is back to balance. So there's a lot riding on what transpires coming into next week. Do the bulls continue to hold the longer term time frames? Well, it's going to be very important to see if we take out today's low or high on Monday, right? At least initially. Now, next week is a weird week because the market is closed Thursday, so there'll be no videos and I won't be here. But you have the Fed on Wednesday, and then on Friday you have the options expiration. I'm also rolling over Monday. So after today, if you notice, look what I wrote. I wrote rollover gap fill here. Okay? Because we're going to be trading higher than today's high. Same with NQ. I wrote rollover gap fill. I'm rolling over Monday. Always roll over the Monday, the week of expiration, whether the volume is heavier or not than the old contract. Okay? So between the rollover, you have the Fed on Wednesday. A lot of times it takes until the next day to digest everything with the Fed. Well, now you have a day and change to digest it until Friday. And then Friday you have expiration, you have ex-dividend for SPY. So again, next week can be very, very interesting. Okay? So, and that's why, again, when I start going to the charts, this is why I use the ETF charts. They're much cleaner. So, And I know this is a long video already, but I hope it helps. I hope it helps you understand what I did. I'm never going to tell you, I took this for the hell of it and I lost money. Of course not. I told you why I took that short, and I told you I'd take it again. Even, right? And I explained why. Okay. So, IWM. Now, I said last week I was going to call it balanced still until we took out March's high. Guess what? We missed March's high by 3 cents. Now, again, I have no problem if you want to call it up. I don't. No problem. But I'm still calling it balanced. I want to take out March's high. So for me, IWM is in a 4-month balance. The weekly is up. Came out of balance this week, up. We had an outside week up, and we're up. Okay? The daily is down. Now, the interesting thing about the daily is we have 2 gaps. You have a 3-day island top. And you also got up to the 200-day moving average. And what did we do after we touched the 200-day moving average? We gapped lower 2 days in a row. That's pretty interesting. Right? We haven't closed above the 200-day moving average since February 21st. Almost 4 months. Now, again, one day doesn't make a market. However, do you see why it's so important? Now, the weekly, again, why it's so important to hold last week's lows now? Because they are up still in ES, NQ, and righty. NQ's one time frame up 7 weeks. It's important because if you take that out, now the intermediate time frame is back to balance, and you have the daily down after failing at the 200. So the monthly is balanced, the weekly is up, the daily is down on the Russell. NQ. The monthly's up. Monthly's very healthy. We've had an incredible run off April's lows. So these pullbacks, again, are not unhealthy. They become unhealthy when things start changing in the bigger time frames. So the monthly is fine and it's healthy, it's up. The weekly is also up. Now, again, we're one time framing up 7 weeks. At some point, it's got to stop, but we don't know when. I think it was last year, I forget if it was last year or 2023, SPY one time framed up for 12 weeks. Who am I to try to pick a top, right? Or a bottom. So, the weekly is up. The monthly's up, the weekly's up. Very healthy. That's why today is very important. Because the daily is down, but more important is if you take out today's low, the weekly comes back to balance. Now, that's not the end of the world, but it does put a stop to the weekly going straight up in NQ. Don't forget, we still have weekly gaps below us. So the monthly and weekly are up, and the daily is down. And then in the S&P, again, just like NQ, very healthy monthly, up. Up on the weekly. Now, we're only one time framing up 2 weeks. Because 4 weeks ago, we took out both sides of the weekly high and low. The week after that, it was an inside week. So we didn't start one time framing up till last week. So we're only one time framing up 2 weeks. Okay? It's not a very big range. It's a $10 range. That's a very small range. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, it's a 10, not even. Let me see, what's Triple Q's weekly range from last week? 11. So these are small ranges. Okay? So that's interesting. So the monthly is up, the weekly is up, the daily's down. Now, before we had that last push, we had barely taken out the 6 low, which I said I was using as my balance. But I am going to call them down now. Okay? Now, I said to the room, we had our push down to the 200-day moving average and bounced off it very nicely. I don't mind more of a pullback. Again, I don't mind if the weekly comes into balance and the daily stays down. However, I would not really want to see the pullback all the way back to the 200 again. That would be not the best thing, I think. So again, I don't mind more of a pullback, but I don't want to see a retest of the 200. Because if we do, getting the all-time highs can be put on the shelf for a while, if that was to occur. Just my 2 cents. Again, these markets are tough. It's not easy with Trump's tweets constantly and these headlines. It's not easy seeing, all these between Russia and Ukraine, India and Pakistan, Israel and the whole Middle East, China and Taiwan. You name it. It just continues. It's never going to stop. But I don't think that is going to be the thing that derails the market. It's not. So I think these pullbacks that are so emotional on what's going on right now between Iran and Israel. Everybody forgot about Russia and Ukraine, by the way. That's still raging. I don't think those things are the factors that will derail the market in the long run. Just my 2 cents. I hope you had a good day trading. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing to this channel. Rest up, and we'll speak prior to the opening on Monday.